The first time my own maggot-riddled corpse leered at me from the shaving mirror. It was Christmas Eve, 1944, and the foxholes around Bastogne were choked with the frozen slurry of boys who'd shat themselves dying, their last gasps crystallizing into rime frost screams on the wind. I'd been Sergeant Harlan Hank Crow in the 101st, a scarecrow in bandoliers who dropped into Normandy like God's own confetti and waded through the Hurtgen's emerald hell, where the pines wept sap mixed with marrow. By the bulge, frostbite had gnawed our toes to black nubs, and we huddled in slit trenches, trading MREs for whispers of home. That's when the Krauts unleashed the fog, not mustard or phosgene, but something biblical, a jaundiced miasma that slithered from their lines like the devil's own halitosis. It hit at midnight mass, seeping under masks, turning our coughs to wet hacks that sprayed flecks of lung meat onto our collars. I clawed at my face as the world inverted trenches bloating into grave mounds, mates convulsing like hooked eels, air eyes bursting vitreous pearls into the snow. Mine burned last, vision tunneling to a pinprick of white-hot agony, and I swear I felt my heart stutter stop, a meaty fist unclenching in my chest. Blackness and nothing. Or so the docs lied when they scraped me off the canvas 3 days later. Coma, Sarge. Shrapnel nicked an artery. You're a miracle. Miracle my ass. They shipped me back on the Queen Mary, a floating abattoir where the holds echoed with amputees thumping stumps against bulkheads. And by VE Day, I was dumped in the ancestral heap outside Gettysburg Crow Manor, a sagging Georgian husk my great-grandfather had raised from the bones of secession, dead in '65. All cupolas like blind eyes in cellars that wept groundwater tasting of iron and regret. The war had salted the earth. The orchards were barren, twisted limbs clawing at thunderheads, and the upstairs lavatory held that antique pier glass, looted from a Prussian officer's tent at Below Wood in '18. Father called it the Observer, its frame a riot of oak leaves and iron crosses, the mercury backing fogged with the patina of 1,000 stairs. I'd always felt it watching nights as a boy. I'd catch glimpses in its depths, shadows that slithered like leeches, faces half-formed, mouthing pleas and tongues that curdled milk. That Yuletide, the blackout curtains were drawn against Jerry bombers that never came stateside, and I lit a tallow stub to hack away the jungle rot on my jawbeard, matted with the ghost stink of cordite and gangrene. The flame spat shadows that danced like flayed skins on the walls, and my reflection stared back, gaunt as a bayonet twist, scar-laced cheeks sunken to the bone, eyes the color of ditch water after a shelling. I scraped the blade down, parting whiskers that came away clotted with something darker than blood phlegm, yellow as the gas, threaded with wriggling specks that I flicked into the sink with a shudder. That's when it moved. Not me, it. My reflection's lips peeled back, not in pain, but in ecstasy-bearing gums receded to fangs, teeth filed to points from gnawing frozen boot soles in the vosges, and the eyes. Jesus wept. The eyes were mine but not, clouded with the milky film of a floater 3 days drowned, irises hemorrhaged to crimson lattice, pupils dilated to voids that sucked the candlelight whole. It grinned, cheeks splitting in wet fissures that wept pus, maggots tumbling from the cracks like rice from a ruptured sack, squirming blindly toward the glass's edge. I retched, bile scorching my throat, brandy and bile, tasting of battery acid, but the thing didn't vomit. It laughed, a silent convulsion that buckled its shoulders, ribs protruding like piano keys under parchment skin, each heave dislodging a froth of lung foam that bubbled against the pane. No, I croaked, slashing the razor across the surface. It skidded with a ululation like a banshee's wail, the glass undulating like a bladder under pressure. From the quicksilver abyss, a hand emerged, not mine, but a talon of sinew and splintered bone, nails black with caked earth from a shallow scrape, pressing outward until the barrier stretched taut, translucent as caul. The fingers flexed beckoning, and the air turned soured milk thick. laced with the reek of low tide and latrine overflow, the perfume of the gassed. I staggered back, overturning the commode porcelain shattering like a skull under hobnailed boot, and fled into the hall where the house exhaled. Grandfather's old pile, with its wainscoting scarred from saber cuts and attics heaped with iron helms dented like tin cans, seemed to breathe, timbers creaking in rhythmic gasps, as if the joists were tracheas flaring with invisible emphysema. From the walls, murmurs percolated guttural, multilingual dirges, Kamerad, manvi, ieux, mud for the maggot, the babel of the bulge, where the dead had bartered languages in their final burbles. Doors I'd latched swung ajar on their own, exhaling gusts that rifled papers like grave robbers' fingers, and in the foyer, the grandfather clock stuck at 11:59 since the armistice chimed once, a toll that vibrated up my spine like shrapnel migration. Battle fatigue, the shrinks had droned in the Channel Port's shell shock's bastard cousin, they called it now. But I knew the foxhole truths, the Reapers weren't myth. In the Siegfried Line, after the barrage that pulped our wire to red mud, we'd seen them first Huns rising from their own craters, torsos ventilated to colanders yet lurching upright, intestines uncoiling like questing worms to snag the living. One latched onto Corporal Reese, dragging him down into the slurry. We heard the suck and pop as it burrowed into him, face erupting from his sternum 3 nights later, gibbering fewer fry through borrowed lips. We torched the nests, but the smoke birthed more hybrids, flesh quilts stitched from Yank and Bosch, shambling in the fog with limbs mismatched, howling for the front that never closed. Dawn clawed in gray and grudging, the mirror innocuous now, reflecting a man with piss stains on his long johns and hands, abraded to raw meat from pounding the floorboards. I tried the telephone line dead, receiver humming with static that resolved into a chorus of rasps. Hank, home. Joined the watch, dash. But the roads were iced over, the Ford's engine coughing like a TB ward. Trapped, I rummaged the library father's sanctum, shelves sagging with regimental histories and a brass-bound ledger, its cover stamped E. Kroll, AEF, 1917. The pages were a descent into madness, script devolving from copperplate to claw scratches. September 28th, Meuse Argonne. The glass was trophy from the St. Mihiel salient, pride from a charnel dugout where the Boches communed with their to 10 first death's own Duke. They called it in the captured missives. At vespers, as I burnished my bayonet, it showed them, my Lewis gunner, face pulped by shrapnel, crawling from the mercury mire, jaw unhinged to flap like a broken gate. He pleads in the pain, Sarge, the wires alive and behind him. The host, legions in Feldgrau tatters, gas-blinded and bayonet-bored, marching eternal. Last night, I smashed it with the butt of my Springfield. Shards flew like teeth from a gut shot, but they regrew, knitting with threads of my own spit blood. And now it hungers. For flesh, for me. The veil phrase, boys. The dead don't forgive the living. Father hadn't perished in his sleep as the coroner spun for the obit. He'd barricaded the nursery one equinox dawn in 42, scrawling the observer sees all on the walls in his own offal, then hurled himself through the glass body parts, scattering like dice, reassembling in the frame by moonrise, a mosaic man shambling downstairs to throttle the maid before dissolving back to quicksilver. The town buried an empty pine box. The Reapers had claimed him, just as the gas in 44 was no fluke, its breath. The mirrors aerosolized across the Atlantic, resurrecting the fallen as abominations. Dead men walking, fronts eternal, fusing the quick with the quickless in blasphemous matrimony. Twilight hemorrhaged purple, and I fortified the scullery barricades of heirloom oak. A Garan chambered with the last clips from my duffel, blessed with salt from the shaker. The house retaliated, pipes groaning like throttled throats. Faucets vomiting slurry the color of field dressings, clotted with hair and nail parings that twitched in the basin. Footfalls commenced overhead thud drag the cadence of a cripple on crutches, descending the grand stair with the scrape of dead heels on runners worn threadbare by phantom parades. The air pressure plummeted, ears popping as if in a Bombay drop, and the whispers metastasized to shrieks. "Hank, the gas remembers. Rise and report." I fired blind through the door when it buckled wood exploding in splinters that flayed my cheeks like Cat O' Nine, and the recoil sang in my bones. Silence fell, a vacuum that imploded my eardrums with a wet crack. Gun empty, I shouldered into the gloom. The manor at Charnel Theatre, furniture toppled like the fallen at Verdun. Walls weeping ichor that etched filigrees of agony faces, half-screams frozen in the flow. The pier glass loomed in the parlor, intact, aglow with an internal phosphorescence like foxfire on carrion. My reflection awaited, not facsimile, but facsimile's nightmare. The Bastogne me, chest caved to a sucking crater fringed with frost-rimmed lung lace, ribs splayed like the fingers of a beggar's claw. Skin hung in tatters, exposing marbled marrows that pulsed with unnatural vigor, and from the wound, tendrils extruded veins, vorms, questing like blind serpents, tipped with suckers that popped with vacuum kisses. It lunged first, the glass erupting in a coronal spray of mercury beads that burned like acid on contact, sizzling into my pores. A pseudopod of fused flesh arm, leg, jaw whipped out, coiling my ankle with the grip of a garrote, yanking me prone. The floorboards split like overripe fruit, and I plunged elbow-deep into rot, soil black as gangrene, laced with relics dog tags fused to vertebrae, helmet fragments embedded in femurs. A Luger barrel protruding from a pelvis like an obscene phallus. Hands erupted from the muck dozens, allied in axis. Nails splintered to bloody moons clawing my fatigues, peeling them away in strips that fused to their palms, grafting me piecemeal. Visions detonated. Father in Ayton, vivisecting his own reflection with a trench periscope, only for the shards to swarm like hornets, burrowing into orifices until he wore his guts as a tabard, shambling to the Mason-Dixon line to conscript the civil ghosts. The gas, the glass's sputum, coughed across waves, birthing reapers that weren't risen but replaced the living hollowed. Puppeteered by the pulped, fronts a Mobius of meat where victor and vanquished merged in perpetual atrocity. "We are the tally," the chorus gargled, voices bubbling from my flayed throat, your debt unpaid. "Die proper, Hank, join the glass." I thrashed, teeth sinking into a wrist that tasted of quinine and Quint's father's, the bones brittle as chalk severing it with a crunch that sprayed gristle. Momentum hurled me free, skidding across the Persian that drank the blood like a blotter. But the parlor warped, walls folding inward like a collapsing dugout, ceiling beams descending as raftered jaws. The horde spilled Reaper amalgamations, doughboy dough fused with SS specters, faces a carnival of mutilations, eyes and navels, mouths and armpits, genitals extruded as bayonets marching in lockstep, the thud drag resolving to a dirge. Over there, over there. Gasping, I crawled for the casement, frost latticed with rime that cracked under my nails like eggshells. Outside, the orchard writhed trees anthropic, branches as limbs flailing in silent appeal, roots rupturing soil to reveal mass graves. Gettysburg bluebellies entwined with bulge yanks, a necromantic orgy under the snow. Dawn hemorrhaged, indifferent, and I tumbled into the drift, the cold a merciful poultice on wounds that wept not blood, but mercury. Silver rivulets tracing runes that burned with eldritch script, observer eternal. They found me at the county poor farm, raving to the walls about fronts that followed you home. Electroshocks smoothed the edges, barbiturates dulled the hymns, but in the ward's steel sinks, polished to false mirrors, I glimpsed them still. In the gleam of a spoon, the curve of a bedrail, the roomy stare of a fellow inmate whose breath fogs with gas yellow. The dead don't rest. They reflect in the rent flesh of the survivor, waiting for the moment you blink. And they blink back. Wider. Hungrier. And one blackout night, when the laudanum thins and the orchard calls muster, I'll answer. Because some debts aren't discharged in blood. They're repaid in the marrow shattered, reformed, and screaming into the endless watch.